Well, I'm going to go to God in prayer. Then we're going to get about his word. Amen. Eternal God, this morning we ask you that you stand for your servant. You speak through your servant this morning, God, what you would have him to say. God, the music this morning has stirred the souls of those who are here, so allow your servant to be able to feed them. God, you know we all are just broken vessels needing to be mended up for a little while to do your will. If you will, with your grace and your mercy, mend your servant up at this time. This old pot of clay, make it whole so that he can deliver your message. It's your son's spirit that we pray. Amen. How y'all doing this morning? Good, good, good. Well, it's always good to see people here, and especially on a rainy Sunday morning. You know, people don't go to church on Sundays when it rains. The umbrellas don't work on Sunday mornings like they do on Monday mornings. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Today I want to talk about something that in 1933, it was a presidential address. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, said, "There's nothing to fear but fear itself." There's nothing to fear but fear itself. You know, from time to time when you hear that, and we know about fear, and we know what fear does to us, but when you think about there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Fear is not real. Fear is not real. It's perceived. Amen? All right. We're going to go over to Daniel chapter 3. And all of us know this story pretty well. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But when you think about it, it's one of those things that you hear the story over and over and you commend them for what they did, but sometimes we don't go through the story to understand the fullness of it. You know, this is one of those stories that's like the flood and like of course, the flood of Noah. So many other stories that we highlight in our Bible, but so often we may not read the whole thing. Daniel chapter 3, starting in verse 1. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So all of them came and assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and people of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sounds of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations of peoples, every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 8. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty had issued a decree that everyone who hears the sounds and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews who you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who paid no attention to you. Your Majesty, they neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you've set up. Verse 13, it says, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I've set up? Now then, you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music. If you are ready to fall down and worship the image I've made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Now, when Nebuchadnezzar made this decree, it was actually somebody else's idea. And what happened was that someone had got a little jealous of the relationship that he had formed with these Hebrew boys, and Daniel being over them, they started to ask questions. Well, why don't they have to do what we have to do? Now, they were not the only Hebrews present, so you can only imagine the other Hebrew boys, whoever they were also there, but they kneeled down and worshiped. But these said that we won't do that. Now, you never heard them complain. You never heard them get mad with the king or mad with anybody about it. Only thing they did was say that we can't do that. We only serve one God. And basically saying to Nebuchadnezzar, you're not he. See, so often we serve one God, but more often than not, we serve many. Because we'll kneel down to our jobs, and we'll kneel down to our wives, and we'll kneel down to our husbands, our spouses, our children. You go on and on and on, and so often we make them our gods. And from time to time, we don't realize that we're making them our God until we realize that we do everything for them, but very little for God. So when you look here and you start to see that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had this thing inside of them to say, you know what? We can't worship that God of gold that you built for yourself. So if you have to throw us into the furnace, we'll go. But they also said, let me tell you this. The God that we serve, if he wants to bring us out, he will. But if he does not, he's still God. See, so often we look at our lives, and because God may not bring us through something that we think he should bring us through, the first thing we will say is God with me? Is God for me? But see, one thing about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they realized that, yes, God is for me. And I'm going to show you how he was for them. Verse 16, it said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to define ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with the three, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. 20 of his commanded, some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie them up and throw them into the furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the furnace. The king's command was so urgent that the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there three men that were tied up and thrown into the furnace? Certainly, your majesty. Look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the fourth looks like a son of the gods. Now, when you look at that, when we think about our own lives, we think about being thrown into a furnace. Who here would not have bowed down to the gold image? See, we think that because we're on the other side of it, that maybe I wouldn't. I'm proud enough that I wouldn't, but I'll just tell you, with the fire that hot, I might bow down too. And I'm the preacher. With the fire that hot, I could say, well, I at least live for another day. But all that was a compromise. A compromise into your spirit that once you start the compromise, where do it end? But if you notice, God didn't leave them alone. He walked with them in the furnace. See, that's where we go wrong sometimes. We can't see that maybe it wasn't God getting thrown into the furnace, but he was in there waiting for him to show up. See, we so often don't think about, what about him already being in the fire, waiting on us to just show up? So that he can walk us around unharmed and unbound. And they said that not a hair on their head was singed. None of their clothes didn't even smell like smoke. Now, the men that tried to, or actually threw them in the furnace, they didn't try. They tried to throw because they got killed before they can get them in there. They died from the fire. But God didn't save them, but he allowed them to be thrown in the furnace, and he walked around with them. And guess what else he did? He walked around until Nebuchadnezzar asked them to come out. Hey, bring them out. And then he said, well, your God has saved you from this fire. Now you are put back into place. Who are we today? When it comes down to the fires of our lives, whatever that fire may be, finding a job, finding another job, going through the fire. What about relationships, going through the fire? Do we allow God to walk with us during this time, or do we just look at it as, you know what, God's not with me right now? Sometimes we don't open our eyes wide enough to see, or our ears wide enough to hear. See, God don't leave us when we are worshiping him. See, their worship was toward God. It wasn't toward Nebuchadnezzar. So he couldn't understand, why would they allow me to throw them in a furnace? They can just bow down. They don't have to really do anything else. I'm not asking them to serve me outside of just bowing to this image. But the three boys said that they won't compromise. See, I look at this as Shadrach, Meshach, and from time to time, it's just something that comes. I said, I got to be a bad Negro at the end to tell the king that we will not go and serve you on our knees. Who do we serve on our knees? Who is our God? When you really think about it, who is our God? It says nothing to fear but fear itself. So has fear become our God? Because if you fear something that's always keeping you captive, it became your God. That's what people don't understand. Whatever holds you captive becomes your God. If it's an addiction, if it's a sin in your life, Whatever it might be, if it's holding you captive, if it's keeping you from moving and going forward, it has become your God. Now, sin itself don't become your God, but when it holds you captive and you can't move and you can't do anything else but think about it and want to, whatever that is, if you want to hold on to it so much that you can't see past the fact that it's not your God, and God will walk with you through it. See, I love the fact that I live a life that I'm really not afraid of much, sometimes so to a point that it scares me. I know that anytime that I get afraid, somebody in trouble. If I get scared, get scared. I'm telling you. If you see pastor get scared, get scared. It's something to be afraid of. Because I've walked in a lot of different places, and I know that God walks with me, so I don't worry about things the way some worry about it. I know that he's always with me in my good and in my bad. See, if we got a God that's going to leave us, then what's the purpose of serving this God? I don't have a God that leaves me, especially when the fire get turned up. See, every now and then when the fire get turned up hot enough, you'll think that God is going to even walk away because you want to walk away. Turn the fire up a little bit more and a little more. It says 7 times as hot as the normal fire he put there, but yet and still they did not think that God wasn't with them. The fires of our lives are always burning. Sometimes they're just a pilot. Sometimes they're raging. But they're always present. So why do we worry about them? You know, I told Ron Barnes a long time ago, we were staying on Barge Road, and he came to me, he said, Bertie boy, man, this doggone mortgage is killing me. And I looked at him and I say, when the last time haven't you been able to pay it? He said, well, I pay it. I said, well, why are you worried about it? See, so often we worry about things that we even pay. Like you got the money to pay it, or it's not going to leave you much, right? But you got it. Paid it. It's done. So why are you crying about it? And right now to this day, he say, every time I think about my mortgage, I always think about, I don't miss no mortgage payments. Why am I worried? But see, Satan will allow things to get thrown in front of you, and then you allow it to worry you. See, worrying is nothing but fear. It says fear, it's only fear itself. It's nothing to worry about. It's only fear. It's fear that you created. If I walk out the door right now and say, Lord, I don't want to get hit by a car, then I need to look both ways. Just simple as that. Look both ways before crossing the street. And look the third time to make sure you had it right. But see, we get into a place where we think that, well, if God is with us, I should be able to just take off in the middle of the street and be okay. Yeah, if somebody's chasing you. But don't just do it just for the sake of doing it. Don't make sense. We have allowed fear to captivate our lives. I drive through neighborhoods. Y'all know that I'm a contractor, so from time to time I have to go in a neighborhood. There's nobody out anymore. Everybody's locked in their house. You go to a gated community that's got a gate in the front, and then everybody's door locked after that. I remember growing up, we forget to lock the door, and we weren't worried about nobody coming in. Now, do that mean that won't nobody come in? No, that don't mean that. But what it does mean is that if you are afraid of it, it usually happens more often than not. Do you know you attract the things that come into your life? Just the simple fact of sitting there thinking about it enough, oh, Lord, my chest hurting. I wonder if I'm having a heart attack. No, that's just gas. Ain't your heart. But you'll worry about your heart first. Instead of just saying, well, maybe it's not a heart attack. And I'm not telling you to ignore the signs of what could possibly be, but I'm saying don't worry yourself into a heart attack. Don't worry yourself into a stroke, because stress is the thing that causes heart attacks and strokes more than any other thing. And I tell you something else. Women have more heart attacks than men do. Did y'all know that? Women have more heart attacks than men do. Because y'all think deeper. Y'all worry more. If I worried like my wife worried, I would be a wreck. Love her to death, but I'll be a wreck. I'm telling you, she know it. She'll say it. She'll tell you. Yeah, if you worry like I worry, because guess what? It always work out. Been together over 25 years, and everything that we've gone through, every fire that we've seen come into our life have been rectified, and God has walked through us with it. So I don't have time to worry now. If more than ever God should be with me now, because he done tricked me. I got tricked. This wasn't my plan. But see, anytime that you look at a situation like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they devoured their country and started to take their kids away, all they did was they took the kids and said, you are going to now serve this king in another country because we lost the war. Judah has been overtaken, and Babylon is now in control. Same thing has happened to all of the countries in the world, every part of every country. Y'all know Texas was Mexico. And all them other little places around there, Arizona and New Mexico, all that was Mexico. We fought to get that. It was only a couple of states that we had in the United States at one point. And we took the rest. That's what happened when you come to conquer. And also what happens is you take those smart people, sharp people as they would call them back in the days, you take them with you. And especially young people, because now you can raise them up. So they got the 4 boys and they raised them up the way they thought that they were going to raise them up. And see, Daniel didn't do any different when he got thrown in the lion's den, because after all of this happened, then they end up losing a war. And another king, King Darius, came onto the scene and he said, I got an image too. I'm going to have my image to stand out front. You know, the other day last night I was watching a couple of the games, and I noticed on this commercial on the SEC channel, they got all of these figures in front of the stadiums. They're like the gods to the stadiums. See, the stadiums was no different than that lion's den back in the day, because they're coliseums is what they are. They was for entertainment. And when you start to look at that, you have these people that sit outside. Like in Florida, you got Tim Tebow, the Heisman winners. You got Steve Spurrier and some others, where they stand outside and they have their images right outside the stadium so that you can be wowed by them. So that when you walk by, they are very tall, bigger than life. And they treat them like gods. Some people even rub their feet as they walk by. They put money in front of them as they walk by. They treat them that way. But we saw what happened to Joe Paterno. All of his life, he built up Penn State and their football program. One thing happened, and they tore down his statue like he never existed. He died 4 months later. Wasn't even sick. 4 months later, he died. He died of a broken heart because man had made him a god for Penn State. And then life told him, you're just a man. Michael Aurelius was one of the great warriors of his time, and he said that he had a man to come and be with him to tell him one thing: you're just a man. And that's what he told him all the time, was you're just a man. That was his job. He said, I'm hiring you for a job. I want you to tell me when I get out of control, just let me know that I'm just a man. So every time he did something wrong, he say, you're just a man. When he did something right and people praised him, he say, just a man. So he knew how easy it could be to become a statue that's set out front. God don't want us to serve nobody but him. And as we serve him, then we can understand that everything that we do and every place that we are, he is with us and he is doing it with us as long as we go with the right spirit. You can do the wrong thing and God will still walk with you. Ain't nobody gonna tell me he didn't walk with me. I could not be here if he wasn't with me. I went too many places, seen too many things, did too many things. Ain't no way possible that if it wasn't for the God that I know. See, they met God in that fiery furnace. They knew him before then, but they met him there. See, I met God in my own fiery furnace. I knew him before then, but I met him there. When it says that there's nothing to fear but fear itself, that's all fear is. It's something to hold you back from doing what God has asked you to do. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego could have easily given in and said, all right, I tell you what, I'm going to bow down now. But when all them little instruments start playing and you ain't present, I'm going to go somewhere and hide. I ain't bowing down to you no more. Now, they could have said that, but yet and still they stood up and said, you know what, I'm going to stand on this, and I'm going to be who I am. I remember during my trial, I came home that evening after leaving Birmingham, and I got back, and the little attorney I had, he looked at me and said, not looked at me, called me and said, hey, I got great news. I said, yeah, it's about 11 o'clock here, it's about 10 o'clock in Birmingham. I said, well, it's a little late, but what's the great news? He said, they gave you an offer. I said, okay, 156 months. See, I was a little sleepy at the time, so I told him, I said, I'll call you in the morning and see what you're talking about. So when I got up that next morning, about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, I put them 156 months in my calculator. I say 144, woo, that's 12 years. That's 13 years. And I called them and I said, I rescind your order. Don't want to do that. Not going to do it. So when I go to meet with them, the first thing they tell me, you don't have to serve a day. Not one day would you have to serve. But all we need you to do is we need you to pick up some more of this dope, and we need you to take it to some of your people and have them to get on the telephone. Oh, just like you did. You remember that's how we got you on this telephone. Just get them on the phone. And guess what? You can keep the money for your family. Oh, what temptation. I just came home and I'm trying to figure out what's going to happen, and all of a sudden they're telling me I don't have to serve one day. But they couldn't promise me that. That's what they said. We can't promise you that. But usually whatever we ask, the judge give. I said, okay. Then they said, well, all you got to do is do this and set somebody up. I said, I can't do that no more. And the guy asked me, his name was Joe Woolridge. Joe said, why can't you do it? He was the prosecuting attorney at the time. No, the investigating officer. The prosecuting attorney was another. But the investigating officer said, why can't you do it, Mr. Burke? What's wrong? And they start to name and name. Such and such did it, and such did it. I say, that's why I can't do it. Because just like you told me that they did it, you're going to tell other people that I did it. What makes me any different? I said, but more importantly, what I cannot do is I cannot put this in my people's hand anymore. It's not about my money and about my pocket or about my family at this time. I don't want to hurt anybody else's family or destroy them with what I know is going to happen. Then guess what? Amazing. They said, all right, well, since you don't want to do that, tell us what you did. I said, well, what you mean? Tell us what you did. And I told them what I did. I told them who I was. And they have some idea from what's called your PSI. They have some idea for what you did, but when you look at it, they was taking me through the furnace because at this time I still don't know what y'all gonna do with me. I got a wife and little daughters at home that's waiting on me to come home. And you trying to give me 13 years. That's surely probably the end of our marriage. If at the least it's the end of something and the beginning of something else. But I stood fast in that courtroom that day, and I told the judge and I told them, I said, I can't do it, I'm sorry. But after I told them who I was, I couldn't tell on anybody else. I was 2 years removed from the case. I said, this is who I am. And I told them who I was. And the judge looked at me, and my wife was there. Judge looked at me and said, I don't know why I'm being so nice, but I'm going to give you 18 months in prison. And then my people started to look like, well, why you got to give him any prison time? I'm like, oh, shh. They offered me 13 years. I'll still be there. I'll be just coming home. Won't be none of this here. I'll be just coming home. And I ain't have to tell on a soul. I didn't have to go back for what God had given me because God told me, I'll take care of it. You just walk through this fire and believe in me. And I believed. And I walked through the fire. He did just what he said that he'll do. Because as I always say, I didn't go to be punished. I went for observation. I went to observe to see what was there. See, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they went in that fiery furnace, because then when they came out, they could walk around and tell people, hey, let me tell you what's at the back of the furnace. Tell you what it looked like back there. It's bones back there in the back of the furnace. It's some clothes back there that still hadn't been burned all the way yet. It's some things in the back of that furnace that y'all have no idea about. But I'll say this to you. When you go in, or if you ever have to go in, take God with you. And he'll walk you in like he'll walk you out like he walked you in. See, so often we don't look at even the relationships in our lives. He'll walk us in and walk us out. See, God will do what God say he'll do. Just try him. So often we get afraid to try him because our humanity tells us one thing and God tells us something different. See, our word means something to God. Like we always say, a man ain't got nothing but his word. Well, that's true. I save my lives till I need them. But I can't lie to God. I never even try. I'm as transparent with God as I am with any human being on the face of this earth. I never even try. I don't lie to myself. I don't even try. I know who I am. I know the truth about me. You know, when I was in seminary, people would ask, why you always tell people you've been to prison? I said, so nobody else can tell it. Why would I want somebody else to tell my story? Because I don't want something to happen and then the dean come one day and say, hey, I know you said that you was here to help your people, but you didn't tell me that you had went there with your people. Nobody else could tell that story but me. And guess what? That story is the story of my life, but guess what else it is? It's not my whole story. It's just a fragment of the story. One of the highlights. One of the points that you start to see, okay, that's how you became who you became. Because I was just a good kid trying to make it. Got caught up in this world of crime and doing some things and like, hey, do what I got to do. But when I learned better, I also did better. When I started to see what it was, I knew then that this is a trap that I should not be caught in. Not even for the federal government would I get caught in this trap again. See, because I also seen that same federal government that said you won't have to do a day. I seen them tell another friend that same thing, and they gave him 15 years. They was only offering him 5 because they said you didn't tell the whole story. So I'm not going to tell you any other story. Do what you got to do. Since he wouldn't tell him the whole story, he got 3 times the time that he was going to get. But he still told, and they still set him up. So when I tell you that when you take God with you, you don't have to worry about what man is trying to do. See, they were set up. Nebuchadnezzar set them up from the beginning. He said, I tell you what, y'all go out and blow the hoop, the harp and the lyre and the zither. You go do all that right now. Let me see if they're going to bow down. It's a setup. If y'all bow down, act like this never happened. If you do not, you're going in that furnace. And because of what they told him, he said, man, we're not going to bow down to this image that you created for yourself. So what they did was they walked through the fire knowing that God was around somewhere. And then they said, even if he's not, what because he couldn't. See, God can do what God want to do. That's what we do most of the time, what we want to do. If we were made in the image of God, what make you think he can't do what he want to do? He been doing it for eternity. He created the world to do what he wanted to do. And I think that he uses the low in life to shame the high in life. He used those who are poor to shame the rich. He used those who don't know anything to shame those who think they know so much. It's reality. See, wisdom don't always come with learned stuff. You can learn all day long. I know some brilliant people that are not wise at all. It has nothing to do with your learning apparatuses to have wisdom. I know people that cannot read and cannot write that are more wise than I've seen in a lot of the schools and universities that I've been to. Can't read and can't write, but wise men, wise women. We look at what God look at. We got to look at the heart of man and not what we see. Not what a person drive, not what they live in, not what they dress like. We got to look at the heart of man and not what we see. This story, we've heard it a million times. Thrown into the fiery furnace for not serving Nebuchadnezzar. Same thing with Daniel. He was thrown into that lion's den. And they said that the lions didn't touch him. And the ones who told Darius to throw Daniel in the lion's den, they threw them in there and they said the lions devoured every last one of them. And the reason being is because they tried to set him up. They dug a hole for themselves while they was thinking they was digging a hole for him. That's how life is. Sometimes when you think that you're digging a hole for someone else, you be the one that lay in it. Be careful of the holes you dig, because you might just be the one that lie in that hole. See, the ones that set him up, set the 3 Hebrew boys up to go into the furnace, those same ones were the ones that got burned before the furnace could open its door good. Same ones. The hole you dig sometimes is the hole that you'll lie in. See, I don't put people in holes, but when you see the examples of what God has been doing throughout history, he has not stopped. God will walk with you too in your fire. He will, and he does. How do you think you got here? Sometimes you don't see it because sometimes you want to think that you got here on your own, but it was God walking you through the fire. Always trying to save ourselves. I tell people, I don't try to save me. That's too hard of a job. I got a little partner of mine named Sean. He's a pastor. He say, if he get me saved, he might make it to heaven. He just might. But I do know this. I do know that if we look at the fires of our life, take God into that fire with us, then there's nothing to fear but fear itself. If God is going to walk around with you in your fire, if he's going to put a shield up in your lion's den, allow him to do it. Then you can trust him better. See, so often we won't even go into the fire. Then we can't trust God because you think God done let you down. You don't let this man make me kneel down. No, you did that. He gave you free will. That's where free will came from. And the free will for these 3 boys was to say no to the temptation of death. See, they wasn't just tempted with money. They was tempted with death itself. Who wants to die? Nobody want to die. So you don't put yourself in deadly positions if you don't have to. Nothing to fear but fear itself. See, we ain't going to be scared in Lakewood. I told y'all that a long time ago. Never scared. Never scared. Y'all understand that? Over here, we never scared. Because if we become scared, then what are we going to pass on to those who are with us? Fear. If we start to feel fear, our children start to feel fear. Those who walk and sojourn with us start to feel fear. So why will we be afraid? That don't mean we don't be cautious. Look both ways before going across the street, but cross the street anyway. I ain't tell you to jump on the freeway. Just cross the street. God is in details. He will always be with you if you allow him to be. Most of the time, the biggest problem we have is that we always take God out of the picture. These 3 Hebrew boys said that no, God is in our picture. They didn't know he was going to walk around in the furnace with them. They had no earthly idea. But he did it anyway. Because they believed that he would. And if he didn't, they believed he could. So their thing is to take God with them wherever they went, whatever they did, because they knew God in a different way. See, they also saw God save them when they could have been killed in the war. God brought them to another country and made them advisors in this country. Same thing happened to Joseph. Put into prison for something that he didn't do, and he still made him second to all of Egypt. They was right behind the lineage in Babylon to be they could take over the city at some point. But those who followed Nebuchadnezzar was in fear that that might just happen. Nothing to fear but fear itself. We cannot allow fear to overcome us, no matter what the fear is. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. Amen. Man, we actually have a visitor here today from Rome, Georgia. He and his wife, and I guess that's grandbaby there. But his name is Chaplain Darrell Ellis. And Chaplain Ellis, I've been knowing now for the past about 5 years. And he's always been the chaplain when you hear us talk about Kairos and different things like that. He's the chaplain at Hays State Prison.
Thank you all so much for just a few moments. I'm very proud of your pastor, my brother, my friend, Gary Burke, who was coming to the Hays State Prison. Many of you don't know this. We've had 5 murders within a 2 to 3 month period. Most of you probably saw some of it on the news and whatnot. But the reason I wanted to take a few moments to say something is because the time when Brother Gary and some others were coming in and were talking about peace and getting along, we didn't have not one incident. We only began to have those incidents when they told us that they could no longer continue to meet with maybe some of the gang members and some of those who were perpetrating the crimes. But again, even when they couldn't come, they still supported the men there at the Hays State Prison. Things are very different there now in some of the other prisons as well. But the joy that I have is that there's nothing like having someone that can come and talk to men who are not afraid of the men. He wasn't just preaching about fear from just a book knowledge, but he has gone into the dorms with me, and we've met with gang members from every gang, right? Yep. All at the same time. Never had an incident, never had an issue. But I think it had a lot to do with this man of God and his love for the people of God. And I called him. This is the first time I've ever done this. I've been at Hays. I started working there in 1999 as a correctional officer, and then I came back in 2008. This is the first time I've ever reached outside of the prison walls to ask for assistance. And we're not asking for money. We don't want money. But I want to take what the devil wants to use as his night to celebrate. And when it's over, use what the enemy tried to use for the wrong purpose to be a blessing to some men who may not necessarily get any of that, period. There are men who are in that prison who don't have any outside or family support. They won't get a Christmas package like some of the others. But what we give them every year is a representation of our love for Christ and our love for them. So I'm praying that you would partner with us. I'm praying that you will partner with us and go to Family Dollar or one of the places, and you're probably going to get that candy probably 90% off or even less. The only thing I can't give them is any kind of chewing gum, because you can stick it in the lock and that can create a problem. But any kind of hard candy or any of the other stuff would be welcome. And I certainly enjoyed the message today. It was a great message that spoke to all of our hearts. God did not give us the spirit of fear. He gave us power. He gave us love and a sound mind. So thank you all for this few moments to talk with you. God bless you, Brother Gary.
And we're going to have one of our little soldiers to come pray us out. Come on, Brother E.
Bow your heads for the prayer. God, thank you for this day. Thank you for letting us wake up and enjoy the sunshine. Well, it was raining, but now it's sunny, and thank you, God, for everything you've done. Thank you for letting all of us come today and keeping us safe. And thank you for the preaching. It was very good, and I really learned a lot from that, and I'll hope I use that when I go to the Air Force, and hopefully you will keep me safe. And God, thank you, and I hope that you will always love us, and we will always love you and praise you. Amen.
See, hey, we get to not thinking about it, but he prayed for us yesterday, and he prayed better than I could have prayed. You know, it says from the heart of babes a lot of times do the overflow of God come out. So want to thank you again for coming out with us today. It's been a good time. Amen. And you are dismissed.